Ready? Okay, so today we're going to be talking about fragments and activities. And this is the beginner talk, but we're definitely going to get into the nitty-gritty here a bit. For those of you who may disagree with some of the things I say, just wait until the end. But if you have any questions about what I'm saying as I'm saying it, feel free to reach out. But if you just completely disagree and you want to say that I'm saying the wrong thing, we'll talk about it at the end. There's time for that. But this is the beginner talk. I always want to do while I'm doing this talk, think about what you want to hear next. If you want to give it, feel free. I'm just doing this until somebody else doesn't want to. So until somebody else wants to. So just if you have a beginner topic you want to talk about, something you want to get deep into, just let me know. Otherwise, just give me your suggestions and I'll try to get the presentation ready for next time. So what are they and why? That's the big part here. So I'm going to start off with reference because I planned to do this talk before we went to DroidCon, but after going to DroidCon, I saw all the speakers list, and I thought, well, I want to see every single talk that's talking about fragments and activities. And so the big one that was great and really that I took a lot of information from was Bill Phillips. He works at Big Nerd Ranch. Really smart guy. We got to talk to him for a bit. They're a really cool company. Follow him on Twitter. Learn some stuff from him. So we were just in DroidCon. It was great. I highly recommend it for anybody to go to, for any of us to go to as Android developers, or if you're interested. Learned a lot. There was some beginner stuff too. So if you're on the beginner side, don't be afraid. Also, they just announced that DroidCon San Francisco is coming up. November 10th and 11th. They just did a call for speakers while we were there, so they've only been taking speakers for about the past 2 weeks. And yeah, so if you want to do a talk in San Francisco, go for it. It's kind of intimidating because we heard talks from people at Facebook, Square, Etsy, like really huge companies, Realm, people who are writing these awesome libraries. So it's kind of intimidating, but I mean, go for it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's where I got some information from. I asked Bill for his permission to steal a lot of his ideas, and he said it was cool. So yeah. First off, we're going to talk about activities. An activity is a single focused thing that the user can do. That is from the documentation, stole that sentence straight out of there. So the way I try to explain it is maybe logging in, one specific thing. Focused thing. Interacting with contacts is a thing. The idea of a focused thing is, it can mean a lot of things. So it's kind of hard to really nail this down, which is why this is kind of a controversial subject, fragments and activities and how to use them. But I'm just going to tell you the best way I can tell you, and a lot of stuff I'm pulling is straight out of the developer docs as well from Android. The first thing you need to understand when you're thinking about activities is the life cycle. It's long enough that it has to fit on 2 different slides for it to be visible. It's not that complicated once you understand it, but you definitely need to know how it works. And if you're coming from someplace like the web, you're not really used to seeing things like this because, oh, I just have to refresh the page, and nobody really cares about like rotation or anything like that. So I'm going to go through a lot of these methods that happen in the activity lifecycle, and I'll explain why in a bit. So first off, OnCreate, you set up the global state of your activity, typically your views, maybe instantiate something. So imagine when you first open your app, your activity is launched and it's created. Next, your activity is visible, but it may not be in the foreground just yet. It's just started. It's on the way to becoming visible. Next, it is visible, but it may not be in the foreground. That's what I meant. Next is the on resume. At this point, the activity is in the foreground. The user can actually touch it, do things, hit buttons, all that good stuff on resume. Next is the on pause, and that's after the app is running here a bit. And then on the on pause is typically it's when the device is going to sleep or another activity is pushed on top of it, or maybe another app has a notification that you clicked on and push that on top. So now this activity that you were on is now paused. So this is just the other half of the life cycle here. We're looking at the on-stop. The on-stop, the activity is no longer visible. It's maybe on its way to being killed by the system. And then on destroy down here when the activity is finishing or being killed. Now, that's a kind of a lot of information, but there's certain parts of it that are more important than the others. So I've never really done anything important on destroy. It's just part of the life cycle, just sort of for your information kind of deal. So to talk about the entire life cycle as a whole, you have to think of it as in loops or lifetimes. So obviously the entire lifetime of your activity is in between the onCreate and the onDestroy. What you typically want to do with that lifetime is on the onCreate, you're going to set up your global state, set your content view, which is basically your layout, your UI, maybe get some references to it so you can, click on things and do things later. And then also another example of something you would do on the onCreate and maybe finish it on the onDestroy is that if you have a thread running in the background, you want to create the thread on the onCreate and then get rid of it on the onDestroy. Scroll. So next you have the visible lifetime, and that's in between the onStart to the onStop. And essentially what you want to do there is if you're updating the UI in some way, maybe you're doing some type of broadcast receiver to update your UI, you would handle that in that lifetime. And then you would dismiss your receiver on the onStop. And then the foreground lifetime is just in between the onResume and the onPause. So that is the amount of time that the user can actually interact with this activity. And what you want to do there is really, really lightweight things because these are called a lot. You know how often, if you're on battery saver mode, your phone goes to sleep all the time. It's calling on pause and on resume every single time that those things happen. So you want to do really lightweight things that can be done really quickly. And specifically, what you probably want to do there is like maybe handle animations, really lightweight things. Say start animation, turn it off, that kind of stuff. Oh, and also commit your unsaved changes on the on pause, because if it's on pause, it could be going to on stop, and then it could be getting killed, and then you want to make sure you have some type of state saved. So why did I tell you all this? So straight from the documentation, the entire life cycle of an activity is defined by these activity methods. All of these are hooks that you can override to do appropriate work when the activity changes state. So what does that mean? It means whenever you do what you want to do anything, you think about what you're doing within your application, you need to think of it, okay, where would this live in the life cycle? Where would I begin this? Where would I stop it? Where would it make the most sense? If it's a background thread, like I said, you would do it in the between the on stop to the on start between the on stop. If you're doing animations, in that visible lifetime, things like that. So you always need to think of those lifecycle methods as you're developing, and it makes your life easier because you know that these methods are going to be called, so they're really dependable. Quick code example of this. So this would be your main activity.java. You can see I'm overriding the onCreate, so you're going to override the lifecycle method, and you have this bundle here, which basically you can keep state, and you can restore your state when the activity is being killed. That's what we would store in the bundle. So you have your bundle, and you can restore whatever state that you had, whatever it was. I'm not doing anything with it here. But all I'm really doing here is calling the super of the onCreate, because I still want to call the rest of what the OS once it would normally call. So you always call the super, and then what I'm doing next is doing set content view, which is setting the global state, grabbing the layout of this activity, and I'll show you what that looks like. This is just the XML file that I was referencing here. It's simple layout. Sorry if I try to read for people in the back. But I just created a simple blank activity in Android Studio, so you can just see that that's there. This isn't anything complicated. All that's here is a relative layout and a text view. It's just a text view that says "Hello World" in it, just to show you that this is what that was referencing to. And if you remember from my talk last time about beginning Android development, whenever you have a new activity, it has to be specified in your manifest file. So if you have a whole bunch of activities, you're going to have a whole bunch of them declared in your activity, in your manifest file, I mean. And then all it really has here is the name, the label. The intent filter is like, a descriptor of like how you can get to this activity, what you can really do with it. Yeah.
Does Android Studio put those entries in there for you?
Yeah. If you say you're going to create a new activity, it'll do this for you. So a very simple example of starting a new activity, you use an intent. Use an intent to do a lot of different things, but it's just saying you want to start this this activity. You give the class, you give it the context of your where you are right now. You can put an extra. There's a lot of extras you can put in. So like this would be more maybe an example of if I wanted to pre-fill an email address, you could just pass it maybe the email address, maybe your subject, who you're going to CC it to, that kind of stuff. And then you just start your activity. Just showing you a little bit of code so that some of this stuff makes a little bit of sense. So a gotcha of this life cycle and things I've talked about so far are configuration changes. And this is straight out of the documentation. Unless you specify otherwise, a configuration change such as a change in screen orientation, language, input devices, etc. will cause your activity to be destroyed. So what that means is, if you're looking at your phone like this and you turn it, it's going to go back through all the way through the activity life cycle. So that's why you need to keep track of what you're doing where, and that's why it's important to put things in the right places and be creating objects and destroying them within that life cycle, so that when the phone just turns, it's doing everything the right way. So you can set your phone to lock screen orientation and not have to worry about that, but it's kind of a hack, and maybe you should be able to support both directions. So that's just important. I think this comes up a little bit later here. So next we're going to talk about fragments. So far if you just had a simple view and you want to do some simple things to it, you can just use an activity. You have a layout. You can click on it. You can do all that good stuff from what we know so far. Fragments are another portion of that. Straight from the Android documentation, a fragment represents a behavior or a portion of user interface in an activity. So, and I just thought it was funny that one of the default slides on Keynote was a quote. So I said the quote was from the Android docs. He's a doctor. Get it? Thank you. Android introduced fragments in 3.0. Essentially, when tablets started coming around, they're mainly used to support more dynamic and flexible UI. Primarily on large screens such as tablets, but our phones are getting bigger, so the fragments are used there as well. You can use multiple fragments in one activity to create a multi-pane UI, and it's helpful because you can reuse your fragments in other activities. Helps reusability of your code. Just so you can kind of visualize why you would use fragments. So if you, let's look over here on the right first. So we're talking about a handset. You just have one activity that has one fragment in it. So this is a list view, and the one activity has one fragment that it uses to show the view, and the view code lives inside the fragment, not the activity this time. And then if you hit one of the details of that if you click on one of the rows, you go to the detail view of that list. And here, we're starting another activity that holds another fragment that actually will have the view of that detail of that data. Now, if we go back to this tablet view, if you want to reuse that code that you built, since you have your view code and maybe the things that are dealing with that list in that fragment, and maybe you have the code and the way that you show the UI of that detail view in that fragment, you can have an activity that organizes these two fragments next to each other, so you're reusing your view code essentially to kind of just visualize what that is. But this is adding a lot of complexity, right? And the thing that a lot of people get frustrated with is now fragments have its own life cycle. So we just talked about the other activity life cycle, right? It took me a minute to get through. There's a lot of stuff going on. They have their own life cycle. Another life cycle, and it's even longer. So this is one of the very first reasons when people see this and they see the activity life cycle and they see this, like, well, what? This is so confusing. And it can be, but if you can read this, a lot of these methods were already used in the activity, so you kind of know the way they work already. There's a few additions. I'll talk about those. So there's onAttach. It's called when the fragment has been associated with the activity. There is the OnCreate view, which is called when to create the view hierarchy associated with the fragment. Just essentially, you would grab your layout, maybe grab references to your buttons and your text view, stuff like that. And then your onActivityCreated. It's called when the activity, so the fragment lives inside of an activity because it's like a sub activity, kind of think of it that way. That onActivityCreated is called when the activity onCreate is called, when it finishes more specifically. And then this is the other half of the lifecycle here. What's new as opposed to the activity lifecycle is the onDestroy view, which is called when the view of the fragment is being destroyed, and then the onDetach down here, which is called when the fragment is being disassociated with the activity. So it can seem like a lot of stuff, but if you have a good handle on the way the activity works, you have a pretty good idea of how your fragments work. And when you're calling them and adding them to your activity, these are things you need to keep in mind. So the important parts, like I said, most of these methods act the same ways that they did in the activity lifecycle. At the bare minimum, probably in like a functioning app, you're going to want to use the onCreate to initialize your critical components. Your onCreate view, like I said, to grab your layout, maybe get references to your buttons and text views, and then the onPause in your fragment to commit any changes if you need to come back to this thing later, maybe update your data, things like that. Some code. So again, this is your main activity. Like I said, you're going to have this fragment lives inside of an activity. This looks exactly the same way it does before. It's just looking at this XML file set in the content view of that. But this XML thing looks different. In my XML, I just have reference to a fragment, and all this is just this one fragment for right now for a simple example. And again, this is I'm not doing a lot of complicated code here. On Android Studio, you say, new project, an activity with a fragment. This is the code that it generates. I just kind of walk you through it a little bit. In your main activity fragment.java, this is that onCreate view method that I mentioned before. It returns. This is just the code that's generated here. This is where I would, if I wasn't using Butterknife or something like that, I would get reference to the text views, the buttons, maybe add click listeners on it, things like that. I'm not actually using the onPause or the onCreate here just because this is what's generated so far. Next part of using fragments that is intimidating and can be kind of confusing is dealing with this Fragment Manager. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. You have the fragment transaction, which is, this process, the kind of way to explain it is of like what you want to happen. So maybe you're popping a fragment off, popping a new one on. Maybe you're adding one. Maybe you're replacing it. That's what you do with your transaction. Your Fragment Manager is a way to get reference to all of the fragments that are within your stack, and you can find a fragment by looking for its ID or its tag, and then you can also pop them off your stack, or maybe add a back stack change listener. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of complicated stuff that you can do with the Fragment Manager and the Fragment transaction. Yeah, I just recommend looking that up. It's too much to go into right now. But all this is doing right here is declaring a new fragment and starting a transaction, replacing the container that I have with the new fragment, and I'm not adding it to the backstack, and then committing it, which will make the transaction happen. And so with the idea of reusability, that your fragments shouldn't know what activities they live in. You should just deal with interfaces, so that when you want to talk to your activity, you just declare in your fragment, you declare an interface. And so on article selected, so let's say if you were in that list that we were talking about before, you click on one of the articles, and then in your activity, it will need to implement this interface that you declared in your fragment. Sorry, this would be one line of code, but it's just really long. And then this would be the callback of what this returned in your fragment. So now you can do whatever you want to do in your activity. I tend to do a lot of my actual business logic in the activity, which I might be changing after some talks from DroidCon. That could be another topic altogether. Why people say not to use fragments. This is a fairly controversial subject. So the talk that I saw with Bill Phillips, he said his talk was about using fragments because at Big Nerd Ranch they talk about using fragments because they're unavoidable at times. But what people say about not using fragments, the next person who spoke, she said, you might be able to get away with it, because your layout is fairly simple. Maybe you're not supporting tablets. If you're trying to have reusable view code, like what you would put in a fragment, they would just put in a custom view instead. And a lot of people just say, oh, well, this app doesn't use it. And then another part that she referenced was just, and a lot of people, from talking to a lot of people, a lot of it's just preference, and I think all those are valid points. But the conclusion of Bill's talk, which is what I agree with, is that reusing the code in fragments is the way that Android wants you to do it. If you look at the documentation, it's all there. You have the lifecycle there. The lifecycle is your friend because it kind of gives you a guideline of what to do when, and it should help you get rid of objects when you should get rid of them. And then also, there's a lot of stuff that Android gives you for free. The dialog fragment, the list fragment, the preference fragment. All of these things are built into the framework. And if you're not using these, then you're writing your own.
Are there reusable business things like calendar fragments?
I think in like instances like that, you would do an intent to use something from the OS and return from that, like an email or something like that. You can say, oh, an intent to do that and return from that. Same thing with a camera or your gallery.
So if you wanted to do a date picker, you would send the intent to the calendar and send the date.
I think date picker is something that's built in.
There's
There's a date picker fragment.
No, it's not a fragment. It's just a
widget. There's a widget for that.
dialogue.
Yeah.
Can we extend those fragments that are
Yeah, definitely. What's that? Yeah, definitely. I do that's a list fragment all the time. If you want to add like a footer and a header to it, that's not straight built into it. So you have to kind of figure that out on your own maybe. But yeah, so lifecycle's your friend. The docs say so. When they say you're going to when you're going through the Android documentation and you want to reuse your view code, they're not going to say build a custom view for it, and it's not so they're going to say use fragments because that's the way that it works. And they did a lot of work into tying these activities and fragments together so that they know really well how they work. But it's a lot to learn. It's not completely straightforward. But I think this is definitely the biggest part of Android development. That was my biggest hurdle when I first started. And I think once you learn them both together, it really it makes a lot of things click. And then the big part is supporting the layouts. The talk that said that not to use fragments altogether at DroidCon, the layout was super simple. They had an activity for every single view in this app. So she had like 30 some activities with 30 some XML files, and I mean, are they reusing any of that? I doubt it. I mean, maybe they're using some of the include XML tags, but I think if you're not doing it with the fragments, I think you're probably writing a lot of logic just to handle how all your views work yourself. So yeah, this is just I drew this because this is awful, but so this is the way it would probably work if you didn't have fragments, right? You have a list, which is list activity, which will have an XML file associated with that, and then your detail of that would be another activity, have its own XML associated with that. So you click on something on a cell, it brings you to a new activity. And if you hit back, it'll still bring you back, of course. That's not a problem, but the main thing is reusability of it. So if you get onto this tablet, if you wanted to support tablets, you would have another list detail activity, but then to have your list on the left-hand side there and then your detail on the right-hand side, you're going to have to write all that stuff yourself. Straight up rip this off from Bill Phillips's talk. I thought it was just a good way to illustrate it, even though his is handwritten. He took a picture of it. But so this is the way. This is probably the more recommended way to do it. You have a list activity that holds a list fragment, and then you click a thing on there, and then it brings you to your detail activity that has one detail fragment in it, and that would be if you're on the handset. And then if you're going to support tablets, you would just have one activity, and it would have its own layout. This layout would include 2 fragments, and then you can reuse the code that you already wrote for your handset originally. But yeah, I think that's about all I had. I don't think I missed anything. Yeah, thanks. And my slides are at Corrado. Slides at Corrado. Anybody? Thanks.